any of you would like to make an opening statement after that, please do that. That's entirely up to you. There's no requirement that you do so, but if you want to, that's fine. And if not, we will then proceed to the questions, which I think you've got some knowledge of. Right. Can I start with, on the left, my left, and your right?
Thank you, my Lord Chairman. Thank you firstly for inviting me to come along. I'm hoping I'm going to be useful to you, but I'm not sure. I'm Rebecca Crerar. I'm the team manager from Ipswich, from the Suffolk Refugee Support Forum. We're a charity essentially funded by lots of different grants, Big Lottery and Henry Smith Charity and various others. And we've been in existence for 12 years working in Ipswich with asylum seekers and refugees. We operate a drop-in service, an advisory, advice and advocacy service, and also we offer English classes, a women's group, and lots of other bits and bobs for asylum seekers and refugees. And Ipswich is a dispersal area for asylum seekers as they wait for a decision on their asylum claim. And it has also become a home for very many Afghan and Iraqi Kurdish refugees in particular. So we're working very strongly with those people and working on integration, really, trying to get them sort of into British life, in a nutshell.
Thank you. Right.
Thank you,
Helen
Chairman. Hibberd. I'm the coordinator for Hackney Migrant Centre, which is a small drop-in on a Wednesday afternoon, and we see all different types of migrants, so people who are refugees and asylum seekers, but also anyone else that would consider themselves to be a migrant. Our main services are similar in a way. We do advice and advocacy, a lot of signposting and referrals, but we also aim to offer a kind of social and welcoming space and offer English classes. We see migrants from over 70 countries, so sort of tend to see the spectrum, I guess, across London. A large majority of people that we work with are refused asylum seekers or people who have irregular status, as well as people who are getting their refugee status or indefinite leave to remain. And I guess we were mostly set up to try and tackle the problems that people have in accessing good quality advice. And we tend to see migrants that come from all over London, not just from Hackney or East London.
Thank you.
Lord Chairman, before I start, can I just say that I've left my bag outside. I'm just worried about any security issues, so if somebody could help me by bringing it in.
Amanda, could you bring the bag in? I think that's safe. Things do happen to bags.
So sorry about that. Lord Chairman, my name is Juan Camilo. I work for the Migrants' Rights Network as a project manager. The Migrants' Rights Network was set up 5 years ago with the intention of better connecting groups working to support migrants and other individuals and other stakeholders who engage with migrants. Our aim is to advocate for migrants' rights, but we also put a lot of emphasis in supporting migrant community organizations to develop a better understanding of policy issues and to try to support them to develop their capacity to engage with those policy issues. Through our newsletter, we reach about 4,000 different individuals and organizations, mostly within the UK, but also some of them in other countries in Europe.
Thank you. Well, I think that's very useful. Does any of you wish to make an opening statement before we move on to questions? Right. Okay. Well, let's have a look first of all. I mean, the Migrant Rights Network, one of you, noted in your written submission that the EU's general approach to migration and mobility is dominated by a law and order perspective. I wonder if you could explain what you meant by that, and sort of elements in the new general approach, the Commission's latest communication, the one actually considering now and writing a report on, would you wish to have been given greater prominence if, as I assume, that comment was basically a rather pejorative comment? Critical comment.
Well, just, as I understand it, it has a lot to do with the origins themselves of the global approach in 2005, which was basically responding to a crisis in the Mediterranean in migration, and a lot of emphasis has gone into developing bilateral relationships with countries of origin and transit. And as I understand it, there's quite a lot of emphasis in controlling or reducing irregular migration as a condition to move on to other topics. So I think a lot of it is related to that. We're unsure about. I mean, it is an unequal relationship, that of the European bloc. Sitting on the same table with countries in the north of Africa, for example. So we're not sure. We have concerns about the sort of leverage that the European Union can have in terms of making that their central agenda, kind of like controlling the exit of people. Beyond that, I guess one of the things that we would like to see more is a more positive approach in terms of recognizing that migration, especially in difficult economic times, should be part of the economic development of Europe. We feel that there's a lot of emphasis in managing every single step of the migration process, right from the issue of demand and supply and matching areas in the labor market where migrants are needed with those skills outside, right through the whole process of people actually starting the integration process even before they migrate, right through the whole process within the European Union. And it's very kind of like state planned, and it leaves little room for adaptation and change, and of course things not always go as planned. So I guess that part of it. But then I guess this emphasis on irregular migration and kind of like the external border of the UK, we also think it creates tensions with some of the common basic principles on integration. Now, looking through the new document, I mean, one thing that's welcome there is the section where it says that it should be migrant-centered. I mean, we fully agree with that, and migrants should be looked as rational actors, making rational decisions rather than a focus on what the needs are here and how those needs are going to be met. The other section that I welcome is also some section where talked about empowerment, and we think that should be a big part of it, that the migrants should be empowered so that they can contribute at their fullest once they're in the UK. Now, it's welcome that those two issues are brought in. We think they're not developed enough within this document.
Yes, but the rather negative comment you made, I mean, don't you think that the scenes we've all seen on television and had reported in the press of people setting out in totally unseaworthy boats to cross the Mediterranean from Libya under Colonel Gaddafi, from the Maghreb, from indeed West Africa into the Canary Islands, and the appalling stories of people, of the suffering that's gone on, that surely justifies, to some extent, taking a more rigorous approach to this and trying to get a better framework for the passage countries, countries through which these people pass, and the origin countries, to try to avoid some of these appalling scenes. I mean, don't you think that can't just be dismissed as a law and order approach, can it? I mean, there is a degree of humanitarian policy involved in trying to avoid these horrors.
There is, and I would agree with that, but at the same time, if that becomes the starting point of a global approach, a comprehensive approach on migration, you're starting off from a negative issue rather than seeing migration as the potential in migration and to contribute to the future of Europe. So if your starting point is, well, we need to halt irregular flows because otherwise there'll be no confidence in the whole migration system, then you're basically starting off from a point, well, this is a problem, this is a threat. I guess that is the issue, is using that as the starting point. I think you're absolutely right. I mean, nobody wants to see these scenes. Whether it should be the starting point for a new approach to migration, I guess that is the question.
Yes. Well, I take your point about the balance, but I do honestly think that that's where we are. I mean, there's been rather a lot of experience, both from West Africa into the Canaries and across the Mediterranean and across the Greco-Turkish border. And some of them have been horrendous, and they haven't been caused by the general approach on migration. They've been caused by exogenous events. Anyway, I think I've got the picture. Does anyone? Yes, Lord Richard.
Can I just look at your document for a moment? Because there are one or two sentences in there that I raise my eyebrows and I don't quite understand. Perhaps I could just read them and ask you what you mean by them. In respect of the thematic recommendations, this is paragraph 1.8, set out in the communication, our view is that these lack coherence because of the failure of the EU to reach a proper understanding of the way in which the single market generates demand for immigration. I don't understand that. Well, what did you mean by that? 1.8, bottom of the page.
Right. Well, first of all, I'd like to say that I didn't draft this document, so I'm not sure if I can answer exactly on line by line. But I guess the issue there is that migration, a lot of the measures to control migration end up failing because there's structural. There is the demand and the spaces for migrants to come into Europe and work, and I guess that is what we think should be a starting point. Is that Europe's economy needs migrants and there is that demand for migrants and that perhaps is not reflected enough within the document.
And that doesn't deal with illegals, does it?
Sorry?
It doesn't deal with illegal immigration. Because if you start on the basis of saying what does Europe need by way of migration, then that doesn't, whatever policies you've got dealing with legal migration in that sense, doesn't deal with illegal migration.
Well, the thing is that when options for moving in are very restricted, and you still have those forces kind of within Europe, that demand for labor and those push factors in the countries of origin, then I guess that is when illegal migration happens.
But I mean, are you saying we shouldn't try and deal with illegal migration?
Well, no, I'm not saying that. States need to protect their borders and and they should. But I guess no, they definitely should. I guess the question is, why is there illegal migration at the levels that there are at the moment? And it has to do with structural issues in the labour market. And often some of the measures that are put forward to control it and end up causing more damage than benefit.
Could you tell us what you see as the consequences of adopting the approach that you're putting forward?
The approach of the
approach you're putting forward. You, on the one hand, you're criticising, I think, the emphasis on the law and order perspective, and you're proposing a different point of view about the emphasis of the elements in the general approach. And I wondered what you thought would be the consequences of adopting the approach that you're putting forward.
Who's putting forward?
What would happen if we did what you wanted?
Well, I'm not. I don't think I'm putting forward a specific approach. It's just criticisms that we have on the way that this approach has been formulated. And as I said, there are welcome elements within this one. I think we're just noting some of the issues. I mean, I'm not proposing an alternative approach here, but I think a lot of the issues around irregular migration could be better tackled through addressing structural issues within the labour market. I mean, and that goes for other vulnerabilities that migrants that have. I mean, it's not just irregular migrants. I mean, a lot of the abuse and difficulties faced by migrants are caused by their vulnerable position, and very often in the labour market. So I think that which is not addressed through immigration measures, I'm aware, but I think that is a key part of it.
Yes,
as I understand, I should declare an interest instead being that I have a daughter working with the Suffolk Refugee Support Forum. As a volunteer, as I hear you, you're saying we're not actually policymakers, but we want to share with you our anxieties about the consequences of policies that's presently operating.
That is correct, yes.
Without putting a leading question, would you say from your field experience, and I address this to all three of you, your field experience, that there is sufficient or insufficient cohesion and cooperation between, for example, the Home Office, the Department for International Development, government departments responsible for industry and the economy, health, education, and the rest? Or do you sometimes feel that the situation is fragmented, aggravating situation?
Yes, let's have one of the two. I see you would like to come in on this discussion. We must move on fairly soon, but yeah. Please respond if you could.
Lord Chair, going back to the point about the borders and the whole thing of, making it easier and more difficult for people, I think it's important to establish there are two areas really to look at, which is sort of your migration, where you've got people coming in to work in the UK and wanting to come here and work, but then you've also got people who are fleeing, who have to leave by illegal measures, unfortunately. They don't particularly want to get into those boats, but they don't really have a choice, because what they're leaving behind is worse than the choice of getting onto that boat or being smuggled by rather cutthroat traffickers. And I think it's important. I don't know that I have the solutions, because I can see how every country needs to protect its borders, but I feel maybe a joined up approach, and I'm not claiming to be an expert on this, a joined up approach across Europe so that the reception procedures are the same for all migrants, especially those claiming asylum in those countries are the same, then I think it would share that burden a lot more. And I still think you have to have measures in place, but it seems harsh to me that we've got, you know, cameras now, heat-seeking cameras over in Calais, turfing people out of containers that are coming into Britain who are asylum seekers, who really are vulnerable individuals. I mean, I've met people who have lost family members on the way. They've died, they've drowned on the way, and it's a harsh reality. You know, the guy I'm particularly thinking of is an Iranian cardiologist who lost his wife and 2 children overboard and they drowned. And he arrived in a complete state. He's now got his life together. That was several years ago. But you know, those are the harsh realities of people having to flee, and it needs to be taken into account when you're looking at protecting borders.
Yeah. You?
Well, I'll just thank you, Lord Chairman, just addressing what Lord Judd said. I think as an organisation that's dealing every week, not every day, with different departments and things like that, there isn't much joined upness, unfortunately, although sometimes it can be good because so much of the joined upness would be punitive in a way, but it's sort of addressing as well what Juan is saying, that so much of the policies that are created to try and prevent irregular migration actually create irregular migration, and the document is talking about brain drain and circular migration. What the government seems to fail to acknowledge is by making it so difficult to come in, people tend not to leave because they don't think that they can come back, or policies change which mean that previously regular migrants suddenly are forced into irregular statuses, and it's not their fault. You know, they came in under one assumption, suddenly the rule changes whilst they're here, and there doesn't seem to be much evidence for some of the policies that are being made, which is kind of concerning in that respect. We see lots of labour shortages in unskilled jobs in the UK, but there is no route for people outside of Europe to come and fill those jobs. So for us it's frustrating because all we see at the moment in the press particularly is negative attitudes, and I was quite concerned that your opening statement was the problem of migration. Again, it's just reinforcing, why can't anybody see that migrants can be beneficial? In fact, there's not even strong evidence that migration has been bad for the UK or the economy. So it's the pervasiveness of that is damaging in a way, and it's kind of welcoming that this report actually talks about trying to create policies from the perspective of the migrant, when clearly the UK policies don't take that into consideration.
Yes, well, don't worry, that we are receiving plenty of evidence on the side of the argument that you just explained, not least from the UN Secretary General's Special Representative for Migration, Peter Sutherland, who very much took the view that you've expressed, and also from the Swedish Minister for Migration, who had perhaps more positive attitude towards the benefits that an economy can achieve from migration than you might think from a country that applies quite rigorous controls. So that point of view is being put to us. I would defend talking about the problem of migration because, quite honestly, it's unrealistic now at this juncture to not face up to the fact that a large number of our fellow citizens believe it is a problem. So I think it's best to take that head on and not try and argue that it's not. But whether or not we can move forward will depend on the evidence we take and the report we write. Now, I wonder if we could move on. Lord Mackenzie.
Thank you, Lord Chairman. My question is addressed to all three witnesses. A brief answer, please. What migration trends have your organisations experienced since 2005, when the global approach was first launched? And also, have you noticed any changes in that time? And has the financial crisis, the world financial crisis, had an impact? Starting with Rebecca.
Thank you. Since 2005, it was the year before I started working with the Refugee Support Forum, but prior to that I was with the Refugee Council, so I was working at that time. And at that time, I don't know if it's really that relevant to what you're investigating at the moment, but we had an awful lot of Iraqi Kurds and Afghans and other nationalities who had arrived in the UK, claimed asylum, been given 3 years leave to remain, and were in the process of saying that their situation was still too dangerous to return, and were filling in forms to, they were called extension of leave to remain forms, to get indefinite leave to remain. So since 2005, I've seen a lot of our clients receive indefinite leave to remain. They're mainly men, they're mainly the men that have left their countries. And since then, as they've got settled status, they've been able to find work. The recession has been difficult. There are a lot, I would say probably approximately a third of our clients are out of work, unable to work or not able to find work, even though in Suffolk there are quite a lot of food processing jobs. People are working in chicken packing factories and in the sushi making factory as well. So there's quite a lot of work, unskilled, fairly unskilled labour. Since they've received their settled status and they have enough income, because they've only got indefinite leave to remain, not full refugee status, they have applied for their families, or they have married from out of the country, back in their home countries, and those wives and children, pre-existing children, have arrived into the UK. So we're seeing a lot more family work now. So we've gone from these sort of individual men to families with all the associated issues and positives as well.
Which is an improvement, presumably.
It's an improvement for them, yeah, and certainly for the men who have been 8-9 years away from their families. I mean, we're working with teenagers who grew up for 8-9 years without fathers in their lives, who are now coming to the UK in their GCSE years and having to try and struggle to fit in. So I would say that's the main change I've seen in terms of people's status. We've also seen a lot of problems in terms of legal aid cuts, which mean that immigration advice is very difficult to get. We're struggling in Ipswich. We've got one company that will help people. The solicitor works for 2 days a week, do legal aid, immigration advice. So she's very overworked, and I've seen a great decline in the quality and in the availability of legal aid advice for those people, which is a shame, because I think a lot of them, I'm talking, really about the people that have got their decision, but we do still have a lot that don't have a decision, who are going through very long, protracted cases and who can't get good legal advice to support them and are being let down when actually they may well have had a good chance without that. So I'm not sure that's really that relevant, but I thought I'd share that with you anyway, so thank you.
Thank you.
Well, it's quite difficult for us to comment because we've only been in operation since 2008, so I don't know if we can really comment
in that
on
time scale, yeah. So thank you. Juan?
Well, perhaps the largest change on migration in the UK in the last years has been internal, which was basically the decision not to have transitional measures on Central and Eastern European accession countries. That had the largest impact. So, which is, I guess, that's on the side of the global approach on migration and mobility. But that had the largest effect.
Would you say that was a wrong decision?
No, I think it has been actually quite successful, despite a lot of the media's take on it. If you look at it from the perspective of the rights of migrants, there are much more issues with Bulgarian and Romanian nationals at the moment who have limited access to the labour market, and they're facing much more difficulties than Polish or other or workers from other AA countries. All the evidence, or not all the evidence, it is a disputed area of evidence, but some evidence suggests that it didn't cause more unemployment. So I think it has been very successful having that legal channel to bring in a workforce. Perhaps those who didn't have in other countries of Europe, especially Germany, didn't open its door. There have been studies that suggest that UK got the more skilled and the more talented migrants than other countries in Europe. And these measures only last 7 years anyway, so by now they would have expired. But by far that was the largest that has had the largest impact on the landscape of migration in the UK. About the economy, I think it remains to be seen. Growing economies pulling migrants. I guess high levels of migration are a sign that there's a healthy economy. Poor economies don't attract migrants. It's as simple as that. I believe there is evidence of increased migration into Germany, which is, with the current situation, I mean, you wouldn't be surprised that that's the area of Europe that is attracting migrants. And then there's the issue of whether there'll be migrant flows from countries that are more in crisis, like Spain and Greece and Italy. Theresa May was on TV not long ago saying that they had no evidence whatsoever of this. And yet, the Prime Minister yesterday, I believe, was almost jumping the gun, saying that he was prepared to introduce controls on Greek citizens before there's any evidence of large-scale movements of Greek citizens. Sorry?
I don't think that was what he said. He said there would have to be evidence of quite exceptional circumstances before that was done. That was the account that I read. But anyway, the issue has been raised. But I think what we are really asking is whether the impact of the economic and financial crisis, which has after all been running at a pretty steady rate from 2008 onwards, what sort of effect that has had on migration, both legal and illegal, in your experience, not what might happen in the future.
I think there has been some evidence, perhaps Poles, for example, going back home because there's probably more opportunities there now than there are here.
I think the evidence is that it hasn't happened at the level that people were expecting it to happen. Right. Actually, people have set roots in the UK. So yeah, I think it hasn't happened at the level that people were expecting.
What happened in 2005 was an enormous build-up in the so-called legacy cases, which I think came to some 250,000 at one point and was supposedly eliminated by July 2011.
Yes.
Did the same thing happen in other European countries? And in your opinion, should the GAM contain provision for dealing with long-term irregular migrants whose cases have not been able to be solved by the host country, particularly considering Article 8 considerations where if a person has been in a state for a long time, he's built up social and family connections, which it would be perhaps unlawful to break by deporting him back to his country of origin. So, I mean, we have a lot of irregular migrants who've been here for 10 years or more,
I presume that other European countries have a similar experience, and yet do we see anything in the GAM which deals with that on a comprehensive basis? Or do you consider that it's best for it to be left to individual states?
I don't actually have any evidence of it happening elsewhere. I've not heard that it's happening elsewhere, but that's not to say it isn't. But I do know that the actual personal impact on people's lives is quite horrible. The fact they cannot work, they cannot get on with their lives, and many have, like you say, been waiting up to 10 years. And I see people on a daily basis through my work who are in exactly that situation. And one particular young man he's got an English girlfriend, he lives with the family of his English girlfriend, he's been offered work by them, by connections through that family, he speaks good English now, he's what I would call integrated as far as possible, and yet he cannot work and he can't sleep at night because he's constantly worrying about his case, his legacy case. And it's a terrible situation. And I would say that if someone can prove that they've integrated to that level and they've been here that long, legally, they've not done anything illegal during that time, that they should be given a very good chance of having settled status. And I think that should probably be the case across Europe if it is a problem in other countries too, which I don't know about.
How many of these irregular migrants who've been here for that long do you reckon there are in the United Kingdom? And do I understand you to say that you do think that there should be a GAM rule which deals with the general problem?
I think there should be, because I think it's totally inhumane to expect people to wait the length of time they've waited. I was forever telling people wait till July 2011. It came and went. We didn't even have, the Home Office didn't even have the decency to tell us that they weren't going to make decisions by then. I had to then face these guys and tell them, sorry, but we're now being told it's possibly 2013. Oh, just another couple of years of your life. And the reality of that is really, really hard. They are on medication, they're anxious, they're not sleeping. They really are, they're not just sort of taking this in their stride. They're really, the human suffering is enormous, and it shouldn't be allowed. It really shouldn't be allowed. And I do find that the UKBA's attitude is very offensive in the way they speak, and they rarely speak. If they ever communicate, the errors they make, the way they send standard letters out to people who the letter doesn't apply to, the lack of information, the loss of files is atrocious. It's embarrassing. I apologise on a daily basis for the state of our government and the way they deal with migrants.
Right, I think we must move on. Lord Richard.
I'm wondering whether any implications in your field of the fact that we're not in Schengen. Does that have any effect? Do you pick any practical results from that?
For me, no, because I think any migrants that I deal with tend to be the refugees and asylum seekers from further afield, so they would need passports to travel through Europe anyway. So.
It's not something that I feel that we really can comment on.
I mean, we've been commenting on some of the chaos at the border, and I guess one does wonder whether it being within, if the UK was within the Schengen area, whether that would be more easily kind of addressed. There is definitely a layer of bureaucracy that comes from not being within the Schengen area, and one has, and it is a costly operation, that of policing the borders, and I guess one has to ask whether the results are such that it justifies the expense in terms of Schengen.
Yeah, but the government are measuring their policy, rightly or wrongly, on net migration. the more exceptions that you make for the sort of people that you're meeting, and I've got every sympathy with the way you, Rebecca, discussed, the sort of interface you have with your clients, the more difficulty each success has for somebody who might have an even stronger case further down the line. And in particular, the effect it has on vast numbers of overseas students who want to come to this country legally, return to their own country having studied, but get caught up in this headcount of net migration. Do you think we can satisfy any of your objectives within the confines of a policy which measures success or failure in terms of net migration?
I'm not sure I can answer that question.
No, what I'm really getting at, your good works somewhere could be to the detriment of somebody equally qualified or even more qualified who has had the benefit of your help.
It shouldn't be about numbers, though, should it?
But it is. That's the reality of government policy at the moment, isn't it?
But I would like to see a distinction, as I said at the beginning, made between people who are migrating for reasons of students, to be a student or to work.
But you haven't got it. For right or wrong, and it's not up to me in this committee to say what I think of government policy, but for right or wrong, the government are measuring success or failure in their ability to cut net migration figures from hundreds of thousands to tens of thousands. Now, isn't there an inevitability that is going to make your work not only more difficult, but possibly almost impossible? And some of the successes in your work might well be to the detriment of people who have got even greater qualification to be here.
You're talking about qualification as in...
No, qualification in terms of human beings, their needs, the oppression that they're escaping from, whatever.
I'm not sure I quite understand, but if you're mixing up sort of students and workers with people claiming asylum, then I'm not saying all asylum seekers should be given leave to remain in this country, by no means, and I actually do have some issues with what happened 5-6 years ago when people were given a leave to remain. I'm not sure I really believe that was the correct thing to do at the time. But I don't think that you can start saying we need to chop numbers, when it comes to people's lives. If, humanitarian disasters in countries do create people fleeing,
No, I understand that. You believe it, I might well believe it, but that's not the legal framework within which you're acting.
Sorry, can I try to answer that question? I think it does have a big impact. Unfortunately, the government... This net migration figure partly depends on the number of Brits leaving the UK and long-term migrants and other migrants leaving the UK, and that figure has gone down, which means that net migration can go up even when the number of migrants coming into the UK stays level, which means that the government has to cut numbers even more on the people coming in if it wants to reach its target. But then it only has limited options to cut the numbers. It can't cut numbers of European citizens exercising treaty rights. It has a duty to listen to cases of people asking for asylum, which means that it is the students that have been cut. It means that it's third country people coming to work, which are skilled workers, because the UK doesn't have a policy of allowing low skilled workers to come from outside the EU to come to the UK, and now it's for family reunion, where a minimum income threshold has been introduced based on whether people can it's based on the level in which people don't have to receive benefits from the state, but which will have a big impact on the numbers and one suspects that they are linked. So, I mean, you are absolutely right. It's if the government wants to achieve its target, when there's more of one group, it has to cut more on the other group, and you get all the different interests lobbying to government. So the universities have had a strong voice, are making their case. Yes, Lord Chair.
No, I think that's clear, but we do have to be a little bit careful because we are not conducting an inquiry into the British government's immigration policy. Okay. So we have, obviously it's perfectly legitimate to express views on the subject, as you've done, and some of them are probably quite valid views, but we mustn't allow the inquiry to drift off into that direction, because what we're writing a report about is the Commission's communication. Okay. Now, Lord Avery.
Yes. What do you think could be done to improve the integration of migrants, both EU and non-EU, into the UK and European labour markets? And do you have views on the respective roles of member states of the EU? What those roles should be in this regard? Can I ask a specific question that follows on from that? And says, can you compare family reunification and family visit provisions in the UK with those in other European member states? And do you think that we should aim at greater degree of harmonisation with regard to family reunification and family visits throughout the European Union than exists at the moment?
I can't actually compare them because I don't know the facts for the rest of Europe, but I think the word gets back to the home country as to what the rules are and how things are getting tougher here. The new £18,600 threshold for bringing in your wife into the UK is obviously the word's getting round now. 9th of July, they're all talking about it, and I think it will affect people's decision on which country they go to. And I just think this game of sort of pinball going on between European states making rules to make it more difficult is a bit sort of pointless, really, and that actually it would be better to have a unified approach.
Both on family visits and family reunification?
I don't know so much about family visits because it's not in my experience. It's family reunion that I do.
Any other comments on that question?
I'm not fully aware of the specifics of family reunion rules in other parts of Europe.
Well, we're talking about the wider question. That was an instance that I was asking you about, but I also originally asked you about measures for integration of migrants within the UK and within the EU generally, and family reunification and family visits was one example of that.
I think from our perspective, the problem of integration quite often lies with just the kind of bureaucratic loopholes that people have to jump through. So if we just focus on people who come legally or get their status through being recognised as a refugee, the sort of ongoing problems of trying to find people, trying to just get a national insurance number which would enable you to work or access benefits is really difficult and really challenging, and trying to get kind of clear guidance from the Home Office when you ring them up, or clear instructions, it's just kind of repeated obstacles to people actually just being able to get on and settle, and it's incredibly frustrating. And I know that, I'm not just going to go on and on about the Home Office sort of errors and things that we encounter every day, but I rang up the other day. Now everybody is told they need a biometric residence permit. If you ring up the Home Office, you get an automatic message saying any application made within the last 6 months we're not going to comment on. So it's just incredibly frustrating for people who are being told they have to get to this. They apply and follow the rules, and it's not them but then they're being held up by this permit. And you know, so that to me is one of the biggest barriers to integration. If you want people to settle and be a part.
You mentioned the right to work. Can you compare the rules on right to work for long-term migrants who have not reached settled status, such as the Zimbabweans, with the rules which operate in other European countries? And would you favour a common European approach in allowing people the right to work after a certain period of waiting for an asylum application to be granted?
I don't know what the rules are in other European countries. I mean, the rule in the UK is if you've waited more than 12 months, you should be given the right to work within the restrictions of Tier 2. So, I mean, that we welcome that, but I mean, we would welcome that people should be able to be given the right to work immediately from when they claim asylum, because if they, you know, that people want to work, they're usually quite highly skilled. So, but I mean, I guess some kind of European consensus would be good on that, but I can't comment on what the other policies are.
Would it be appropriate if we brought question 7 up as a follow-up from Lord Avebury, because this question of the preference for the UK over other countries, may I do that? Going to question 7, what do you think motivates migrants wanting to come to the UK in preference to other countries within the European Union?
I think there are work opportunities here. I don't doubt that that's a very good reason. I think the working conditions are good as well. I've heard that established communities, family, very big support communities already existing is obviously a very good reason for coming. And also the English language. I think the fact that we speak English, and they quite often have English more than they have French, but not to say that people from the Congo don't go more to France than they would come to Britain, so it's not just to the UK, is it?
I mean, there is a common perception that it is rather easier to get lost in this country than in some of the others.
I don't think anyone wants to get lost, though. In my experience, people do not want to go and become illegal, living on the black market people. You know, it's an awful existence. No one would want it. I think they come here hoping that they will be treated with respect, that Britain has got a reputation for giving people. And I think quite often people do know what they're coming to. And I think we at times would like to think, oh no, people don't know the difference between Britain, France, Germany and how they treat people as they arrive. But I think they do, and I think the word gets home very quickly. I mean, apparently the Afghan boys are all talking on Facebook to one another now, the young under 18s, and they're saying it's best to go to Sweden. That's the latest place to go because you get 90% of people get indefinite leave to remain upon arrival. You know, it's the word is getting round, I think. And it is, you know, we do treat people with respect here. I know we don't to a certain degree. There's always errors in it, but I think we should be proud that Britain does have that attitude towards foreign people, that we're not half as bad as some countries in the way we receive people, I think.
Yeah, and just to follow on from that, I think it's also to do with the provisions in other European countries, you know, so for asylum seekers arriving in Italy or Greece, the reception conditions are so much worse, which is why many asylum seekers will then travel again to try and get to countries that have slightly better decision making. But also, I think it has to be acknowledged that some people don't know where they're going if they're getting trafficked or smuggled, so the choice isn't theirs.
Yeah.
I can't comment on numbers and percentages, but some people don't know where they're going, and that is a...
If I can answer, it's a very big question because you get, migrants are a very, very diverse group of people, but I think the English language thing is very important. You have to think that there's very large economies in the world developing, and for many millions of people, learning English is part of professional development, basically, and they want to come to countries where they can learn the language and then go back. There's the university, so the UK set out to actually become a powerhouse in the English language, a university sector. Tony Blair had it as a policy, and it's been incredibly successful, and a very large percentage of people who are classified as migrants every year are students. Then when people are surveyed on why they choose the UK, a tradition of tolerance, respect for law comes out always very high, and I think it is something that we should be proud about. And then I think you should never underestimate the pull power of a global city like London. I mean, a lot of migrants will be young people who want to move to a global city and enjoy life for 1 or 2 years. It is a great experience. So it is very varied, and whilst there's all the issues with asylum seekers or refugee people who are persecuted, if you're looking at the statistics, that a large part of that will be people who are studying or just living life and enjoying life, and it is an attractive place for those reasons.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your written submissions, which I see are very much based on your experience of casework. And the question that I want to ask is that what are the main difficulties and challenges which are faced by migrants entering the UK? Can we deal with that first before I ask the second part?
My experience with asylum seekers entering the UK, I would say, danger of what Helen's already mentioned, is really just the bureaucracy of the Home Office and going through the asylum process.
Would you say that's the main challenge?
Yeah, definitely.
Would you all agree?
Certainly that's the initial main challenge. You know, there's further along in terms of integration, there's other challenges, but that's the initial main one, definitely, without a doubt.
There's the question also of whether there is a culture of disbelief within the UK Border Agency, and that has been highlighted in the past. So, and I believe the UK Border Agency recognises that might be the case in part of its workforce.
So you'd say it's the mindset and the attitude of the UK Border Agency?
Yes. So basically the person coming in having to prove that they are a legitimate asylum seeker, a legitimate student, a legitimate worker, a legitimate family member.
Do you want to add anything?
I mean, only that we work with migrants as well as asylum seekers. I don't know so much about the challenges faced by them, but also just that there aren't really any legal routes for asylum seekers into the UK anymore, and so they are forced to coming in illegally or using false documents, and you know, people are being imprisoned for that, even though internationally it has been legislated that people shouldn't be prosecuted for using false documents to flee.
Do you have any suggestions as what might be done to overcome some of these challenges, either in the UK or in the EU? What would you like to see changed to deal with these difficulties?
On a very practical basis, I think that the UK borders staff should be trained better, and just the whole organisation. It feels very much. Perhaps it's about looking at the management and the way the structures are set out, and the culture that's within that organisation.
Yeah. And also just to comment on the detained fast track, which I don't know if many of you know that, but it's supposed to fast track people who are from the sort of white countries that we don't think asylum seekers can come from, but also it's supposed to filter out people who are victims of torture or trafficking. But there have been quite a lot of reports looking at the quality of the decision making in that to put people into detained fast track or not is quite poor. And again, it goes down to that kind of initial screening interview of people and what the quality of that is like, and you know, just being aware that people are arriving in a foreign country totally disorientated, and is it appropriate to be interviewing them without any kind of advisor sort of straight away, and just, you know, longer term, the issues with appeals and things like that, quite often that you know, appeals are overturned is quite a high success rate, so it's just, you know, it just would be better to do better quality advice and a more humane system initially, to hopefully make those decisions a bit.
So what you're saying, if I may say so, if I've got it right, is that it is the one of the greatest problems that both migrants and asylum seekers face is the servants of the state with whom they come into contact when they are trying to regularise their position. So would that mean that it doesn't really make much difference whether the rules that are being applied are national rules or European rules? Because of course, as you know, the way the European Union works, you're going to be dealing with the same people whether the rules are European rules or national rules. There wouldn't suddenly be a European asylum officials all over the place. That's not the way the European Union works. So I just wanted to get a feel from whether you think that it would actually make much difference if asylum rules were set by the European Union rather than as now in this country where they are set largely by the British government.
Well, I think there's two separate issues in my mind. I'm not sure. Like, one is to do with the way that the policy is just, whatever the policy is, the way it's implemented on the ground by the staff. And in terms of a wider European policy, I think there is scope for that and improvement in that. In, you know, I don't know how much you know about the Dublin II conventions about when someone has to claim asylum in the first country that they land in.
Right.
And I mean, you know,
They don't.
well, they don't, but also you know, I think the EU needs to kind of look at that. It's unfair in a way that Italy and Greece are getting so many asylum seekers because they're on the border, and whether Europe should look more widely at how did Europe manage that, rather than having, like, cutting different countries and forcing Italy and Greece to have loads and loads of asylum seekers, and then the conditions are terrible for them, so people are going to try and come to the UK, you know. So I do think that there is scope for a broader policy, but yeah, the way that will then get enacted in the UK is still an issue.
Yeah.
Can I ask another question on that? I mean, do you have experience of how this is working in the EU countries? Because you've described the challenges faced by migrants in the UK. Do you have any knowledge of what the experience is in any of the other EU countries?
Well, I was just at a conference in Brussels for PCAM, which is the Platform for International Cooperation on Undocumented Migrants, and there were quite a few different organisations. And I mean, the organisations that are working in Greece did really describe, like, quite harrowing conditions for asylum seekers and refugees there, and not just the reception conditions, but the racism. I mean, we've sort of seen the rise of some. No,
but I'm talking about the point of entry, because you know what happens, you know, once it's there. But you know, what are the challenges, you know, at the entry point? Because you're describing about the interface they have with the.
Oh well, I think it's worse than.
It's worse.
Yeah, because there's such huge numbers coming in, and they're trying to deal with it, and I think people just aren't processed, to be quite honest.
Sorry.
Yeah,
So would it be true to say, just following up from Lord Harry's point, so you think no matter what the rules, it's the attitude?
Well, but I don't think it's just that, but it's ensuring that the countries have the infrastructure to deal with it as well. You know, like, I mean, staff are also humans, and if they're put under a lot of pressure, then that creates a negative attitude.
Yes.
So it's about ensuring that there is the infrastructure to deal with it as well.
That is what the European Union has been trying to do in the case of Greece by providing support and training with Frontex on the Turkish-Greek border. And that, I think, has produced some mild improvements. But clearly, the courts here have come to the conclusion that the conditions in Greece, as you say, are appalling because they have, if I understand it rightly, stopped sending people back to Greece as the country of first arrival on the grounds that their human rights would not be properly respected. One must hope that that is a temporary situation, and I think what you're saying is that it requires a collective European effort to make sure that all countries are able to cope with these problems in a humane way. I think that's what you were saying. Right. Yes, Lord Judd.
It's sometimes suggested that the kind of experiences you're describing can lead, not least amongst highly intelligent and well-educated people, to profound alienation, and that this can become part of the potential security problem. Do you ever come across any suggestion, any evidence in your work that that is happening, that people are becoming deeply alienated by the experiences through which they're passing?
It's an interesting one. I think people are alienated without a doubt, and they feel very angry and disappointed, I think, is a strong feeling. In terms of sort of wanting to get into sort of terrorism or something as a result of it, no. I personally, thank goodness, I haven't experienced that, and I feel probably because of the nationality groups that we're dealing with, probably it wouldn't be an issue. Possibly. But it certainly makes people feel very negative, and some of it is justified and some of it is unjustified, and it's my job to try and kind of pull out the bits that we can help with and clear up some of the misunderstandings, because sometimes it is just misunderstandings that cause people to feel aggrieved.
Right.
Yes,
what are the main sort of national groups that you have to deal with?
Myself,
yeah.
In Ipswich, we probably 50% of our 600 to 800 clients we see every year are Iraqi Kurdish or Iranian Kurdish, and then probably about 15-20% are Afghan, and then we cover 40 other countries really. You know, we've got Syrians, Sudanese, Congolese, you know, every country you can think there's a problem in, we have them. But there certainly are the big groups of the Afghans and Kurdish, which is interesting when you go elsewhere that it's not, because you tend to get this kind of idea that that's the case for the rest of Britain, but I don't think it is. I think it's just a case of that's where they've decided to make their home and they join one another.
Yes, I can move on to a different question. You know, clearly the challenges faced by non-EU migrants and EU migrants are different. We've heard a lot from you today, particularly about non-EU migrants or asylum seekers. What about the EU migrants? Do you see any problems in that area?
There's a lot of issues around employment with EU migrants and the role of employment agencies, the factories with two-tier kind of like employment practices almost, where one shift might be all European migrants and another one British workers, often working in different conditions. So I mean, the labor market is definitely a big area. Then there's concern around Romanians and Bulgarians who are clearly quite vulnerable to exploitation and working on as self-employed, but really not being self-employed. So there's a lot of issues around there. But generally, I guess a lot of the stuff with European migrants is more an issue about welfare and benefits. So it's more rather than an immigration. For non-EU migrants, the immigration process, until they become settled, is a major factor limiting the sort of support that they can get, whereas with the EU migrants, it's more treated as something to do with welfare benefits. Going back to service and staff, that is where there are a lot of issues very often, and it is frontline staff not being fully aware of rules and regulations and entitlements, and making mistakes in terms of when people are accessing services.
Lord Avery.
Whether you've had any experience of Roma migration in particular, and whether you think that the European framework on Roma should have an impact on the global approach to migration, bearing in mind that there are large movements of Roma, both from the countries outside the European Union and those that are already inside, like Slovakia, which many tens of thousands are at present migrating into the UK. Isn't this par excellence difficulty on which there should be a common European policy that would be reflected in the GAM rather than simply in another document which is specific to the Roma in particular?
I'm not aware of that document.
We don't, for some reason, we don't see many Roma at the centre. I think perhaps because there are specific groups in the UK that deal with that community.
Yes, like Yorkshire, for example.
Yeah, or even in London, there are support groups that will be focused specifically, so it's quite hard for us. I mean, you would always welcome some kind of wider policy that looked at assisting people with integration, because in different countries I think Roma are facing different levels of discrimination, but I can't really comment further on that, unfortunately.
No, I'm afraid I can't comment on it. I don't deal with Roma.
Lord Sharkey.
Do you think that the objective of encouraging circular migration, where migrants return to their place of origin, do you think it's desirable, and do you think it's realistic?
It can work, and from what I understand, it works for certain migrants under certain conditions, and the UK used to have the seasonal agricultural workers scheme, which was mostly, from what I understand, students who came to work over the summer and then went back. I know that Spain has had some success with bringing in farm workers from Latin America to work on a temporary basis and go back. So they can work in specific circumstances. What I'd have to add to that is that there are patterns of circular migration out there that can emerge kind of like naturally, and those patterns can sometimes be disrupted by changes to immigration rules, and it has happened in the UK in the past. So people might decide that instead of returning, they'll stay and stick it through because they assume that it will be more difficult to come back again. So I guess circular migration programs can work in specific circumstances, but I'd be more worried about the disruption of those kind of like naturally emerging circular migration patterns when people actually prefer to stay put because they fear that they won't be able to return in the future.
I'd second that, and well, two areas that I have slight knowledge on. Firstly, the area I work in, we are seeing there's a massive drive of these guys that have got indefinite leave to remain to become British, and much as we encourage them to be British because it's a good thing to be integrated and they feel the ownership, they can walk down the street and feel they belong, there is also in them the drive to then be able to return to their country, check it out, but still return back to Britain if they don't like what they see. And we are seeing families returning to their countries, especially sort of northern Iraq to Kurdistan, where well, I have differing stories of how safe it is there, but I think there are some areas that are relatively safe now. So that's a good sign, you know, we encourage that. I'd like to see some of these people, especially once they have a bit of an education, they've got something to take back to rebuild their country, and certainly we will encourage that. The other side is I had dinner last night with the HR manager from a large factory in Ipswich which makes DVDs of all things, and she works with a lot of Eastern European migrants, and I was asking her about what their plans were, and she said mainly they work for about 4 years, they earn enough money to buy a house outright in their own country and return. But she said that's not to say that quite a few of them also have no intentions of returning and want to settle in the UK because they see it as a place they would prefer to be than their own country.
Yeah, I mean, I would just echo that, and just the point that if you make it able for people to come and go, they will, but if you don't, then they will stay. Yeah.
You don't, I mean, the main context in which this issue gets raised is the desirability, particularly of poor developing countries, not to lose too many of their brightest and best, and that when they do come here and get a better education and more training, they're at least encouraged to think of going back to their own countries, and that's very much, I think, the thrust of the GAM document that we've seen. Do you see any of that in practice? I think you were saying you do see a bit of it in practice.
Yeah. I just think it's a really difficult one because, you know, obviously economically, if you're a doctor, you have to be very driven to go back to your war-torn country and earn pittance or nothing and help your country than to stay in Britain and earn a decent living and watch your children grow up going to good schools. I don't know how you can change that fact, really. But there are some people that are driven enough that they want to see their country get better. But it is really just a moral thing rather than, you can't make it economically viable, I don't think.
And presumably a very great deal depends on whether they think that their countries are on improving trend, the country which they wish to help, in which case they're probably much more motivated to go back than if it's in the hands of a dictatorship or a corrupt regime or whatever it is.
Absolutely.
So that in a way it's the conditions in the developing country that probably make quite a big difference in this case. Of course, that's something over which the European Union has some influence through its development policies and through its foreign policies, but presumably that is quite a big element.
Yeah. It certainly also applies to Iraqi Kurdistan. It's doing extremely well economically.
There's a lot of investment going into Kurdistan. I had a phone call the other day from a chap who's gone back to be an interpreter for an oil company. That's a foreign oil company moved in and he's interpreting now. He's Iraqi Kurdish, he worked with us. But he's gone back and he seems to be doing well. He sounded happy. But then again, you do hear about still the car bomb attacks in certain areas in Kirkuk. And a lot of instability. So it's hard to really gauge how safe it is to return.
Yeah.
In terms of source countries, that are developing countries, it's not just the movement back and forth that often has lots of potential for those countries, but actually the links between one country and the other one. So people are actually setting up business back home which are linked to businesses in the UK. So and that brings benefits both to the country that receives the migrants and the migrant sending countries. And that is referred to in the global approach document, the role of diasporas in the development of their own country. I would emphasize that it goes both ways. It's not just the diasporas benefiting their own countries, it also benefits the countries that they're receiving. But that is a big role. It's kind of like those links between the diasporas and the communities back home.
It's the thing that Mr. Sutherland emphasised a great deal in the evidence that he gave to us, that diasporas have a very positive role to play in both the countries in which they've settled, in Europe, in Britain, and also the countries from which they came, and which they may now be investing in, or in some cases contemplating returning to. Well, thank you very much, all three of you, for coming and casting some light on this really complex issue. It's helped us a great deal. Thank you very much for that. We will, of course, be using your testimony along with all the other evidence we're receiving as we work our way round about the end of the year to producing a report. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to come. Appreciate it.